part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On NFL Sunday, your Sunday morning pregame show. All football talk, no fluff. I'm Cody Roark, host of Locked On Broncos, joined alongside by our good friend, obviously, you know him, David Harrison. He's, he does a great job hosting not just one podcast, but a couple podcasts. Locked On Buccaneers, he co-hosts that, and Locked On Washington Football Team. He's stepping in for Ross Jackson today. Ross is he's on assignment in New Orleans for the Saints and the Giants game. And so we have a lineup here today on Locked On NFL Sunday for you. Obviously, David, good morning, my friend. Great to see you as always. Week 4 of the NFL season is here, and I said it early on this week on Locked On Broncos. It feels like the build-up, waiting for football to get here, it takes forever, and then once it's here, it goes by so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Thursday night was a great appetizer for this weekend's NFL schedule, and that was a pretty great game. The way, I know a lot of people decided not to tune into it, but I decided, I'm a glutton for punishment, and football is football, so I decided to watch it. But look, it didn't disappoint. I mean, it was entertaining as much as it was. Two teams in the Bengals and Jags kind of building things towards their futures. It was still a really good competition. So looking forward to the NFL keeping it going. And I mean, some people say week 4 is when the NFL season really starts. I kind of argue that week 5 is when the NFL schedule, like the season really starts, because you kind of start to really settle in to who people are and what teams are. And the teams that thought they were going to be great on defense, you find out which ones really are. And then on offense, the same thing. So I'm really looking forward to kind of, I don't want to call it the preseason, you know what I mean? But like the early season will be over and we can kind of start really getting a gauge for where people stand starting exactly after Monday Night Football.
Absolutely. Well, the thing I like, too, is each Thursday night football game we've had so far to start the season, it's been a really good game. It's not like Thursday night football is disappointed. Like last season, it seemed like every week it was just a blowout game, one team over the other. But these games have come down to the wire. They've been entertaining. So I feel like we're in a good position so far to start this football season. But, ladies and gentlemen, our lineup on today's Locked On NFL Sunday pregame show, 10 minutes after the hour, we're going to have Patricia Train on, host of Locked On Giants, as she joins us to preview the New Orleans Saints matchup where Ross is there in New Orleans right now. 20 minutes after the hour, we're going to have Lauren Cox, host of Locked On Bears. He's going to talk about Justin Fields getting his second start so far the 2021 NFL season. 30 minutes after the hour, we're going to be joined by your boy Q. He's our boy Q, host of Locked On Raiders, to preview Monday night's big matchup between the Raiders and the Los Angeles Chargers. And then we're going to be joined a little bit later on by Vinny Iyer, host of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, where he's going to bring us all the latest information that we need to set our lineups before kickoff, so you do not want to miss out. And if you want to throw any of your questions into the chat for Vinny, obviously drop them into the chat here, interact with us on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll bring them up to Vinny as it goes on. But, David, let's talk about some of the storylines here of week 4. I'd say the biggest one, and you may be aware of this since you cover the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tom Brady, but Tom Brady is returning to Foxborough for the first time since leaving the New England Patriots and joining the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to take on Bill Belichick in Sunday Night Football. I mean, the storyline's kind of right itself. The over and under, how many times we're going to hear Adele's hello tonight before kickoff?
Before kickoff, I'd say 3. I think 3 times is probably 3. I guess 3.5 would be the over under, but I put it right at 3 is how many times you're going to hear it. I think it's going to be a pretty popular theme. But I mean, look, Tom dropped his own homecoming video as well and had a Jay-Z music backdrop. And I mean, I know Jay-Z has kind of commercialized that song and definitely made some money out of letting people use it. But I mean, I don't know too many players that would have access to getting a Jay-Z song licensed to use for his own personal video. And so, I mean, it just kind of shows the clout that Tom Brady brings. But yeah, I think that one will drop. And then, yeah, I mean, Adele, it's a perfect song. She didn't even know it when she wrote it, but it was just the perfect song for this situation.
It really was. And I was waiting for this to happen for a long time. I just thought the buildup was going to come there. It reminds me a little bit about 4 or 5 years ago when Brock Osweiler, was a member of the Houston Texans returning to take on the Denver Broncos, and they played Third Eye Blind. How's it going to be? And I was like, okay, this is magnificent here. But obviously a lot of storylines here, week 4 around the NFL, some surprise undefeated teams, some teams have gotten off to a little bit of a surprising start in the losing department. We've just seen some very competitive football. And David, it's been something we've talked about here on the show the last couple of weeks, but we've also just seen a continued increase and rise in penalties. I mean, I believe every NFL game averages 15 to 16 penalties so far this season between both teams combined. And in just your opinion, what are your thoughts on just how how much it impacts the game, right? From a viewership standpoint. What do you think of all this so far?
I mean, it's, from a viewership standpoint, it's terrible because anytime there's a break in the action, that's going to take away from the fun of the game and all that stuff, and that's not what fans come to the field for. And you hear people all the time that you shouldn't know the referee's name, right? You have some of your more famous referees like Ed Hockley and stuff like that, but there's a lot of guys. I mean, I go back to my childhood, and I can't remember the name of the official, but there was always an official who every time he called a penalty, we always go first down. That was like his kind of thing, like his way of saying first down was just kind of his call to fame. And that's all fine and good. And Ed Hockley had the Schmedium shirt on every weekend, and that's all fine. But when people know who you are because you're just constantly on the screen, you're constantly interrupting play, and the fans in the stadium are constantly just having kind of that rise and that lull in the action. I mean, it's an entertainment business. I know that all the players and coaches say this is a performance-based business, and when you're in it, that's absolutely 100% true. But when you're talking about the consumer, it's an entertainment business, and nobody wants to see the black and white striped shirt more than they have to. I mean, they have their orders from the top down, and I always kind of hesitate, criticizing people when they're doing their jobs, especially if I've never done them and I don't want to do them, and I don't want to be an NFL referee ever, because it's just such a thankless job. But the NFL has to kind of realize at some certain point they're kind of getting in their own way. And I know this is a conversation that fan bases have been having for years and years. As far as it goes back as far as I can remember. The no fun league and all that stuff. Now you have the taunting rule that is getting over officiated and everything else. And I think that it doesn't impact the numbers. That's like when fans want to know why doesn't the NFL realize that fans hate all this stuff? Well, because it doesn't impact the numbers. The ratings are fine. The ticket sales are fine. Once, now that the fans are back, concessions, merchandise, all that stuff. The salute to service line just dropped, and I guarantee you it got sold out just as quickly as it got stocked. So the numbers aren't hurting, which is why the NFL doesn't make these adjustments kind of in season. But at the same time, it kind of creates a divide between the competition committee and the players and the league, the shield, and the guys that are out there putting their bodies on the line to make this thing work.
Well, and I look at it as it's kind of similar to the NBA, right? The NBA, they always tell where the referee assignments are. The NFL has started in the last couple of years to tweet out, these are your official assignments for this week. Who's going to officiate this game? I mean, at the end of the day, it's not about who's officiating. And I think you make a great point. There was a time in this game where you didn't know the official's name. You just knew certain things that they did, or you knew Ed Hockley because he wore the extra schmedium with the guns poking out and stuff like that. I think now everyone knows when you have fan bases talking about, oh no, we have this official, calling our game this week, that I think it becomes a little bit of an issue as to where things have gotten from the officiating standpoint around the National Football League. But obviously a lot of storylines here in week 4, some intriguing matchups, Monday Night Football. You're going to have an AFC West divisional showdown between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Las Vegas Raiders. Sunday Night Football, which we just talked about, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers traveling to New England to take on the Patriots. And real quick, we'll touch on it here. No Rob Gronkowski. We found that out yesterday, so he will not be making his homecoming. And it was kind of bittersweet, in my opinion, I think, looking at it, because you wanted Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski to have the pass and the connection that breaks the overall record that Brady's looking for this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was looking forward to. I wanted to see, Rob get that 69th yard because, first of all, he would love it, you know what I mean, for one. And then two, like, that might be, it could be like 2nd and 8, a 3-yard pass, but it breaks the record. You might see Gronk spike that thing on the ball. It's like, bro, it's 3rd and 3. Like, what are you spiking the ball for? It's the record. It's the nostalgia. It's the meaning of it. So, it's really disappointing to not see, Rob on the field. He's kind of been I want to say forgotten guy, like a lot of people, but he's the footnote. You know what I mean? Everybody talks about, oh, Tom Brady come back to Foxborough, face the Pats. Oh, by the way, Gronk's also there. And then you kind of have AB thrown in every once in a while. But, but James Yarko, pointed out on the Locked On Bucs podcast on our Friday episode, he never played in Foxborough. He never played a game as a Pat in the Patriots home stadium. He only played the one game, and that was in Miami. But, he practiced and did meetings and all that stuff. But so that's not quite as big. But yeah, I mean, it was one of those situations coming through the week that, if Rob could play, this wasn't going to be a game he missed. Even in week 4, he was going to put as much weight on this as a playoff game, as a week 17 game with playoff implications. So to not see him out there, I mean, and Gronk's a really tough guy. Everybody knows that. So for the fact that he's not playing, and now there's actually reports that he might miss multiple weeks, that just kind of shows you, one, how hard he was trying to play this week to not be ruled out till the weekend hit, and then 2, just how important this game was.
Just a big blow for, obviously, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Big blow for Gronkowski, who's been a tremendous red zone threat for them this season. Obviously, took a shot to the ribs in the team's loss last week to the Los Angeles Rams, looking for a little bit of a bounce-back game. But talking about bouncing back here, the New York Giants are a football team that are trying to get their first win on the season. And to talk about the Giants right now, we're going to bring on Patricia Traina, host of the Locked On Giants podcast. Patricia does a great job covering the team Monday through Friday. Anything you need from player interviews, not to mention insight from practice, Patricia has you covered. Patricia, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, guys. Good to see you both.
Yeah, good to see you, Pat. Good talking to you again. Division rival host here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Always great talking to Patricia. And Pat, like Cody said, I mean, the Giants trying to put everything together, right? There's been some improvements, I think, week to week, but it hasn't led to winning. I know you read a great piece about that on sportsillustrated.com there for Giants Country. Two key weapons missing in this contest. I mean, just as you're getting ready to take those steps forward, you're also taking steps back. Let the listeners know, let the viewers know. I mean, Darius Slayton is one of my favorite young receivers in the National Football League. Sterling Shepard obviously has been a contributor there for a few years for the New York Giants. How big are those losses going to be this weekend? And do you think the Giants can overcome that playing in a tough dome, a tough environment, trying to get off the snide here?
Yeah, those are two big losses for the Giants. Now, I'm going to throw some numbers at you because I started writing my inactive report. So these are going to be in the article that we talked about. But Kenny Golladay, who was signed to be the X receiver, the main man, if you will, has 19 total pass targets. Sterling Shepard has 22. Now, if I had told you that at the start of the season that Sterling Shepard would have more pass targets than Kenny Golladay, would you have believed me?
No.
Probably not, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Sterling Shepard has been their best receiver so far, their most productive guy. Not having him, he's more their intermediate range guy, but the hope is that Kadarius Toney, their first round draft pick, can step in and fill in some of that void that's left by Shepard. Darius Slayton, let's not, overlook that either, because Slayton also gives them that deep threat. And he's actually been the most targeted deep threat by the Giants over Golladay again, which I just don't get, by the way, and I'm sure a lot of it either. But those are two significant losses, and now we're going to see, can Kenny Golladay step up and be the guy that they thought he was when they were signing him? Is Kadarius Toney the future in the slot? We're going to find out today.
Well, I want to go back to obviously the injury side of things. You lose those two wide receivers with hamstring injuries, but you also lose a key guy on the defensive side of the ball, and Blake Martinez, who, Patricia, I can tell you this, he was the one player I was watching defensively in week one when the Broncos took on the Giants. I think he's a tremendous leader there. So obviously that loss is big there. How does this New York Giants team, in your opinion, what would you like to see from them in the next couple of weeks as they deal with some of these injuries? Because they lose key guys, and they're trying to get their first win of the season. Is it more so a Jason Garrett thing, or is it a Joe Judge thing that they need to correct to help them get on the right path?
I think it's a combination of the two. It's funny. I was looking back at the game books, and if Adoree Jackson makes that interception, if Logan Ryan doesn't have that defensive pass interference, a play here, a play there, Darius Slayton doesn't drop that touchdown pass, the Giants theoretically could have been 2-1 by now. I mean, a mistake here, a mistake there, and the mistakes they've been making have been fatal flaws. They have come at the worst possible times. Now, that's not to say that the coaching hasn't been sharp. The coaching has left me scratching my head on more than one occasion. So I think it's a combination of the two. And it's interesting, I was listening backstage when David was talking about how the real season starts around week 5 or so. And if the Giants don't start peaking, that if that arrow's not going up by this time, by this week, even if it's a losing effort, you want to see a cleaner game with mistakes. You want to see a little bit more creativity from the coaching staff. If that's not happening, then my goodness, it's going to be a long year for the Giants fans.
Yeah, and a critical year, right, for the New York Giants,
Mm-hmm.
really. And Pat, we talked about that about this a lot during the offseason and the build up to the year, that it's a crucial season for quarterback Daniel Jones, and a lot of people kind of thinking this is going to be it, whether or not he proves he can be the leader for the Giants franchise. But there's also buzz going around that coaching staff that we've been talking about, and Jason Garrett, his seat's getting a little warm. I think Joe Judge, though, BetOnline.ag, our friends over there, second highest odds to be the first coach fired this season. I kind of came into it thinking that Daniel Jones was really the guy whose job was in jeopardy here. And usually, a younger or a newer head coach who kind of inherited a quarterback problem usually gets a little bit of a bye there. Do you view this as a season that could result in an entire switch there with the head coach, the coaching staff, and the quarterback?
No, no, I don't think Joe Judge is in danger of getting fired this year.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think if anybody, Dave Gettleman, the general manager, might
Mm,
have a little hotter seat than Joe Judge, to be honest with you, because look, this has been what, year 4 of
mhm.
Gettleman. So, and if the results are still the same, then you've got to take a look at that. Now, that said, I do see Joe Judge making a potential change on his staff if the offense continues to struggle. You got to remember, Jason Garrett, I don't believe is a guy that Judge worked with in the past. I'm pretty sure he didn't cross paths with him. Garrett, I think, might have worked a little bit with Nick Saban back in Miami when the two were in Miami back in the day, but um, I don't think he ever worked with Joe until this year. Also, I could be wrong here, but if I remember correctly, Garrett was recommended to Joe Judge by ownership because Garrett had been a player here for the Giants back in 2000 when they went to that Super Bowl, their only unsuccessful Super Bowl. So the Giants organization thinks very highly of Garrett. Now, is what Garrett does a fit for the Giants? You can say yes, but here's the difference. In Dallas, I think the reason why Garrett was so successful is he had an all world line for a number of years. He had a really top running back, in Ezekiel Elliott. Somehow he was able to develop two undrafted quarterbacks, Tony Romo, Dak Prescott, and they turned out to be pretty good for the Cowboys. So I think that was the appeal for the Giants with Garrett. Now that said, Freddie Kitchens is also on the staff. Freddie Kitchens is a guy that Joe Judge knows very well back from their days. I think in college. I forget exactly where I think Judge was in a graduate assistant or something under Kitchens. But anyway, Garrett's the guy to keep an eye on. Daniel Jones hasn't been horrible this year. He's been a little bit better than I think a lot of people thought might be the case. Still hasn't thrown for 300 yards. I don't think this season has come close. But you got to look at the coaching and what are they doing? And Joe Judge said this week that they're going to change up a few things on the offense, especially in the red zone where they have just been absolutely abysmal, and they'll see what happens. But yeah, I would say that the hottest seat right now belongs to Jason Garrett.
It'll be interesting to see how things play out. Obviously, throughout the season, could a change happen in season if the Giants' offense struggles? And I go back to even that Washington football team game that you two did a crossover on, a thrilling game. But there were so many opportunities that the Giants left out on the field for points, and they still scored 29, and obviously a losing effort there. So there's bits and pieces of it. Patricia, I think one of the biggest keys for the Giants, obviously health, having your wide receivers healthy, which I feel like in the last couple of years, it's really been a storyline for them. The wideouts, the key guys that catch passes, have been banged up, and hopefully Kenny Galladay can be a big emergence for them. Kadarius Toney, as you mentioned, and obviously the boost with Evan Ingram returning, and then Saquon I feel like week to week is looking better, looking sharper, and he's getting back to where he probably feels a little bit more comfortable on the field. But a tough test here for the New York Giants today, taking on the New Orleans Saints. Be sure to check out Patricia's post-game recap, obviously after the game, not to mention Ross Jackson, who's there, Locked On Giants, and also the Locked On Saints podcast. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Awesome. Well, taking a look at it, David, I feel like the Giants defensively, I like their secondary a lot. I like Adoree Jackson. I like James Bradbury. I like what they have going there defensively. I think the loss of Blake Martinez will obviously be very big for them in terms of that middle. I'm not sure who's going to help step in and fill the void. Just watch him. He flows sideline to sideline. He's very instinctual. Obviously a big blow for them last week, losing him. But there is also, another team that has been dealing with injuries, and that is the Chicago Bears. And so now we are going to bring on our good friend, Lauren Cox, host of the Locked On Justin Fields podcast, obviously not the Locked On Bears. Lauren, my man, obviously, good morning. Great to see you here once again. I know we had a chance to speak last week. Justin Fields got his first start. Didn't go, I think, how many people had intended, man. But how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm just glad the Bears finally named a starter for this game. They were playing that sort of, we're not going to tell you who it is until the day before thing, even though for the most part, everyone kind of knew it would be Justin again.
Yeah, and speaking of Justin, Lauren, I mean, 6 for 20, 68 yards passing, I think, right? 7 sacks against the Cleveland Browns, and it was a starting center, right? I read that said that the only way for them to go is up now, and so I guess that's the silver lining, if that's a silver lining, really. What do you expect from week 2 here for Justin Fields getting his second start in the NFL?
Yeah, so much of the onus has been on Matt Nagy more so than Fields. That the rookie in his first start looked like a rookie in his first start. I mean, he's gonna make mistakes. He's not gonna be necessarily sharp and crisp. He's not a guy that's been practicing with the starters until Andy Dalton got hurt. So it was very much a crash course last week for him, and it was a crash course for Matt Nagy in trying to build a game plan around a new quarterback. And it felt like last week it was the Andy Dalton offense with Justin Fields put in there. And so this week, everyone's kind of watching to see how will Matt Nagy and offensive coordinator Bill Lazor change things up a little bit and put Justin Fields in a better position to be successful in an offense that feels a little bit more suited to his skill set and his strengths and weaknesses, and less so trying to make him the pinpoint timing, perfect, quick, accurate underneath quarterback that they had for Andy Dalton that Fields just wasn't as comfortable with, wasn't as natural in compared to what we had seen him do at Ohio State.
The Bears offense, they look so different from when Lazar was calling the offensive plays. And I think that's been one thing that's been brought into question specifically this week is really that the Bears offense has changed a lot from how they operate since Matt Nagy took over play calling duties. Now, in your opinion, I feel like it's a bold move for Nagy to do that when the offense was producing better under Bill Lazor. In your opinion, do you think the pressure is on right now for Matt Nagy? I mean, I feel like his seat could be really hot in season as being potentially replaced, but I feel like the saving grace for them was initially drafting Justin Fields to give them more time. Well, I want to know your opinion. My opinion, I'll share that later. But what does this mean for the Chicago Bears right now? Because fans, I feel like they're split down the middle right now as to how things are going in Chicago.
It feels, from my perspective, it feels like it's largely full blame on Matt Nagy. It's not universal. It's not 100%, but the camp that has grown is this is all Matt Nagy's fault. Fire him, fire the general manager, et cetera, et cetera. And even though he is, I believe, the odds-on favorite at betonline.ag for first head coach to be fired, I don't think it's going to, if it were to happen, it wouldn't be for a little while yet. I mean, they let him lose, I think, 6 in a row last season as things were going down the tank in Mitch Trubisky's last season. And it felt like a pretty good turning point last year if they wanted to cut bait and kind of restart a little bit. But instead, they give him another year, and the expectation is that maybe they gave him a couple of extra years once they drafted Justin Fields and said, all right, we're going to sort of see this thing through. So I'm not expecting anything immediate or drastic. I mean, it would have to be another extended losing streak where the quarterback with Fields struggles. But I think the fan pressure is built up quite a bit and really all over one bad game against a really good team in the Cleveland Browns. And that doesn't excuse the bad game by any means, but the team is still 1-2, right? They're not totally out of the playoffs or eliminated from anything just yet. That they're struggling. They're not playing well, and they have some real issues and holes. But I think that fan pressure is a lot stronger than the internal pressure in the organization right now. I think there's a lot more patience for the coaching staff to figure out Justin Fields and to figure out what they want to do, and then for Fields to figure out what he wants to do. The problem is this is year 4 with this head coach. I know this is only Lazor's, I think, second season in charge as the offensive coordinator, but now this week, Nagy won't say who's going to be calling the plays moving forward. So does that mean he's handing it off to Bill and not doesn't want to admit that, or does that mean he doesn't want to admit that he's too stubborn to pass the play calling off? I mean, it's kind of it's a tough one back and forth for everybody, but it's most of the anger is directed directly at the head coach, and everyone's willing to give the rookie a pass for some very real mistakes and shortcomings last week.
Yeah, you make a very solid point. I mean, it's not like the Bears, lost to, I don't want to be disrespectful, but say the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? They got beat by the Cleveland Browns, who were a team who were expected to possibly compete for the AFC crown and potentially be their team in the Super Bowl there representing that conference. So, doesn't excuse, like you said, kind of how badly, the team got beat, but still it's one loss. And the great thing about the NFL is they don't rely on rankings. There's no playoff committee that's going to select people to get in. You get in based off your record, based off your merit. So plenty of season left to go for Bears fans. And something that can help a young quarterback, Lauren, you know this as well as anybody else, is a good defense. And Chicago Bears, I mean, when you think Chicago Bears football, you think defense, you think hard-nosed teams. And that's kind of what Soldier Field just kind of brings to mind. Eddie Goldman expected to return this weekend. How big of an return is that for the defense? And do you think, I mean, it's a Detroit Lions, so again, not really a world beater, not the Cleveland Browns per se. Do you think that his addition to the defense could be enough to allow them to give Matt Nagy, Justin Fields, and the offense enough time to get things together and possibly pull out a win?
I think, first of all, Eddie Goldman coming back is always huge for this front seven. They've done a decent job in run defense the first couple of weeks, although last week against the Browns, two of the best running backs in the NFL, really, really strong offensive line. Would Goldman have been able to completely change that? Hard to know, but he is a huge presence in there, and it makes it so much easier on the linebackers behind them, and it definitely will be a welcome addition. But even last week against the Browns, this Bears defense had the Browns held down to just I think a touchdown through most of the third quarter. It was a one possession game, even as the Bears offense kept failing and failing and failing. And so, it wasn't until the end of the game when the dam kind of broke and the defense got worn out and tired, and just you can't rely on them to do that all game against really good teams. So they've been playing better this year than they have in years past. The pass rush really came alive last week against Cleveland. Secondary is where the big concern is. Downfield passing, especially. They've got some shakiness at the slot cornerback spot, and even the other cornerback not named Jalen Johnson has been up and down for a young Kindleville there. Jalen Johnson has been absolutely phenomenal at cornerback, but even the safeties, Eddie Jackson's still a shell of himself and making some mistakes, just like easy, like angles as a deep safety, allowing a touchdown when he should have been right there to make the tackle, but just overruns it. I mean, just weird things that we didn't see from him when he was at his best, that we really haven't gotten a great answer for him. So there's some very real concerns still on this defense, but I don't think the Jared Goff Detroit Lions offense is necessarily in a position to challenge the Bears vertically in a way that would stress this defense's weaknesses so far.
It's going to be a very interesting matchup. Obviously, divisional matchups always have a little bit more flavor on them. It becomes a little bit more tougher. And look, the Detroit Lions, credit to them and Dan Campbell. They have been fairly competitive so far to start the season and barely almost beating the Baltimore Ravens last week. But Justin Tucker obviously has a mega leg that gave him a 99 overall rating this week on Madden NFL 22. But Lauren, obviously a matchup here where the Bears, Matt Nagy, Justin Fields, they have an opportunity to try to get in rhythm and maybe establish some things that they can build upon going forward in the weeks ahead. And who knows, when Andy Dalton returns, Matt Nagy has been committed to him as the starter. We'll see if that upholds. But obviously, you can check out Lauren and the Locked On Bears podcast every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Not to mention, you can watch him on YouTube as well. A lot of great content from Lauren Cox. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
I appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you.
Boom. David, in your opinion, watching this Chicago Bears football team, you mentioned the points about the defense. Obviously, that stands true. And they've gone through a lot of change. I know Khalil Mack has been dealing with some injuries, but he even looked good last week. I mean, the Cleveland Browns couldn't do anything on fourth down. I was very surprised that they actually went for it a couple times. And look, Chicago absolutely stuffed them. To me, I know everyone's talking about quarterback here with the Bears, but in my opinion, I feel like one of the bigger issues that the Bears have this season is I would say not inefficiency, but the inconsistency of being able to run the football. And that's been an issue for them for the last couple of years. Having a good run game could take pressure off of any quarterback, and not to mention coordinator, but they have not committed to the run.
Yeah, and really, I mean, it kind of goes back to that comment I had from the offensive lineman. I think, like I said, I think it was a starting center that I read it. I didn't interview him. Obviously, I don't cover the Bears, but saying that there's really nowhere to go but up from there. And really, that question was kind of shaped around that offensive line, not just giving up all the sacks on their rookie quarterback, but also in getting the running game going. And you got to be able to do something really well. If you're not going to be an offense that's completely balanced, and you look at a team that I cover, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, everybody kind of knows they don't really have the greatest run game, in the NFL. Leonard Fournette got the start last week. Didn't really look all that improved as a team running the football. What they can do is pass protect long enough to let Tom Brady find those weapons, and you got to do something really well. And there's been some rotation in there, and there's been some problems in there, but I think that's why, when Lauren mentions that, the rookie quarterback not carrying necessarily as much blame in that game as a coaching staff, I think it's because this is a coaching staff that this fan base and the people who cover the Bears have been dealing with for a lot longer. And you're not going to find a lot of people that want to blame a rookie quarterback, especially in their first start, playing against a defense like the Cleveland Browns. Like, I was watching a very popular national pregame show last weekend, Cody, and there were some former players that are on that show, and they were honestly, they were mad. They were mad that the Chicago Bears were putting Justin Fields out there because they didn't believe, and I don't know what their sources were, but they didn't necessarily believe that Andy Dalton was injured to the point where he couldn't play. They felt like they were basically using the Andy Dalton injury as a mask, so that if they decide to pull Justin Fields, it's not that they're benching him. At least publicly, the narrative isn't going to be that Justin Fields got benched. I kind of go back to Tua Tagovailoa last year. It's just that the veteran that was already the starter is now healthy again, taking back his rightful spot. And they felt like it was piss poor management of Justin Fields. And then you look at the coaching job on the field, they start him, and like Lauren said, they basically ask him to do Andy Dalton's job Justin Fields and Andy Dalton. I don't know if you have two different style quarterbacks in the NFL from a starter to backup comparison. So if that's indeed what the coaches did, if they asked Justin Fields to go out there and be Andy Dalton, and then I think that the blame is rightfully set with the coaching staff. And Matt Nagy is a guy that I was excited to see get a head coaching job when he got hired by Chicago, and it really hasn't worked out. A lot of people blamed him for Mitch Trubisky and not using the right scheme with that quarterback and so on and so forth. It seems like if that's the case, that this coaching staff, this team keeps bringing in quarterbacks that this coaching staff really isn't equipped to mentor.
Yeah, well, one thing too that stands out to me, when you have Jason Peters as one of your starting tackles, a guy who's been banged up, I don't think it's a good formula for a young quarterback. And, I think it goes back to that preseason comment that Justin Fields had, that the game, it was kind of slow to him, which now it's kind of coming back to bite him in the tail. But, obviously Fields, I think, is going to have to be, in the right situation at the right time, which, he's a talented quarterback, but it goes back to some of the discussions that I think we have about college prospects coming into the NFL, is that environment matters more than anything. You could be a prolific talent, but if you're in an environment that is not suitable for what your skill set is, it creates a lot of problems for you going forward. But speaking of a problem right now in the National Football League, the Las Vegas Raiders are just putting up yards and points on everybody. And to talk about Monday night's big match between the Las Vegas Raiders and the Los Angeles Chargers, we're bringing on your boy Q. He's my boy Q, and he's our boy Q. Q, my man, good morning. It's great to see you as always. Obviously, the Raiders off to a hot start, so I know you're in a good mood.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's always fun when the team is winning, right? It's easier to cover a team when they're winning. And right now the Raiders are doing exactly that. They have a few roller coaster affair type games at Allegiant Stadium, but hey, man, it's all good when you're winning.
Yeah, always easier to talk about good football than talk about bad football. Absolutely. And speaking of good football, Derek Carr. I mean, Q, we've had this conversation before. I'm a huge Derek Carr fan. When all the rumors were going out, before Tom Brady went to the Bucs that Derek Carr might be available, I was like, hey, the Bucs should call up John Gruden and see if he wants to make a deal to send Derek Carr to Tampa. And every single year, it just seems like there's this rumor, this story out there that John Gruden doesn't like Derek Carr and he wants to get rid of Derek Carr, and then it doesn't happen. And this year, I mean, I don't know. I'm not an MVP voter, so I guess, my take doesn't really have a whole lot of weight. But Derek Carr playing at a potential MVP clip right now. If this continues, and again, there's a lot of football left, obviously, but if this continues, could we see 2022 be the first year that Derek Carr isn't rumored to be traded? And do you buy? I don't know if I've ever asked you directly. I've had some conversation with some other Raiders radio folks. Do you buy the Derek Carr, John Gruden? I don't know. I don't want to call it divide, but rumors, or do you think that's basically media fabrication for offseason storylines?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I don't really ever buy into the John Gruden doesn't like Derek Carr conversation, because if he didn't like Derek Carr, guys, as we know, he'd be gone. I mean, Look at the roster. Look at the turnover since John Gruden has returned. He's been there 4 years, and now I think Derek Carr is the only guy left that was there before he got there. You know what I mean? So, I mean, if he didn't want him, he'd have been gone. He's continued to get better each and every year under Coach Gruden. And last year, I thought, matter of fact, I'll be honest, I thought in 2019, we kind of saw, okay, that's who he's going to be. That's exactly who Derek Carr is, a good quarterback. That's got some flaws, but he's going to be good. And then last year he took a step forward, and I thought, wow, that's pretty good. He does show he can get better. And then this year he's put the team on his shoulders because the run game really hasn't got going. I mean, when you play Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Miami, three teams with really strong defenses, it's going to be tough to run the ball. Well, he's been able to sling the ball around the yard and, like you said, put up the points, put up the yards, lead them to victories, come from behind victories in overtime. I mean, he's playing top-notch Derek Carr ball right now. And really, it's funny. I think by the end of this conversation or this season, we're not going to be talking about his Derek Carr on his way out. We're going to be talking about what the contract extension is looking like and what the numbers are looking like.
It's all, it's the hair this year, Q. I think that's what it is here for Derek Carr. But, look, if covering the Denver Broncos in the AFC West, if Derek Carr ever became available, I'd hope the Broncos would at least call and say, hey, what does it take to get a guy like that? I've been very impressed with him so far. Yeah. But, really this offense here for the Raiders, I feel like it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, because you have to focus the efforts, because when they go full, empty, they go four receivers to one side, they spread you out, but they're bunch formations. So it's vertical, crossing patterns, second level routes. It's so hard to cover, and teams, they've tried to go zone, but guess what? Derek Carr knows exactly where to go against zone. Man coverage, he understands the leverage of the route, and they run, obviously, tight picks. That's what we saw in the Baltimore Ravens game winner and overtime, obviously a thriller there. It's so hard to stop this offense. And right now, Derek Carr, I mean, he's already over 1,200 yards passing so far through 3 games. He's on pace to pass for over 5,000 yards this season, and he's only done that. He's on track of that after 3 weeks. So, in your opinion, you look at this offense, the number one offense right now in the NFL, points per game, obviously in terms of overall total yards. What is one thing that right now you look at this offense that you feel like, okay, they need to improve on this? Because look, it's hard to say because they're looking so dang good right now. But where's an area they can improve in your opinion?
I would say it has to go back to the run game. It just has to, and last week against Miami, Peyton Barber was able to get things going. He went for 111 yards and a touchdown. So that was pretty promising. But clearly everyone knows, and Cody, you know as well, that, John Gruden wants to butter his bread by the ground game. And they just haven't been able to do that. It's funny, yesterday in the media session, he was only asked 3 questions. And one of them was by me saying, hey, how critical is it that the run game gets going? He said, hey, I just want to win. I just want to win. I mean, if we got to throw the ball 50-something times, we'll throw it 50 times. He's like, hey, I want to run. Absolutely. But if we're winning games, we're just going to find a way to win. That's what ultimately matters the most, which he's right. But again, I mean, it's almost like the 3-pointer in NBA, right? You live by the 3, you die by the 3. I mean, at some point, man, you got to be a little bit more balanced. So I think that they want to incorporate that run game, get it going. Josh Jacobs may return tomorrow. He's questionable to play, but Peyton Barber did a good job. And really what surprises me the most is Kenyon Drake hasn't got a lot of burn. And he was a big free agent acquisition in the offseason. I was excited about the 1-2 punch of Jacobs and Drake. Well, it's been a 1 punch, and it's not been Drake. It's been Peyton Barber, and Josh Jacobs has been out. So it's strange. He's good at receiving the ball in the backfield, but he hasn't been hitting the holes when he does get a chance to run. He's been missing blocks. So Kenyon Drake has been somewhat of a disappointment so far. If they can ever figure out how to get that element of the game going, man, that could really bode well for this team.
And, people talk about the NFC West all the time, right? And how competitive that division is and how many playoff caliber teams there are, but nobody's talking about the AFC West right now, not from a national standpoint. And I mean, the Chiefs are at the bottom of this thing at 1-2, and judging from especially our network's power rankings, I mean, the Chiefs, I think we're still 5th, right, guys? I think in this weekend's power rankings, people don't expect them to stay down there, but the Chargers are up there, the Broncos and Raiders. I'm talking to hosts of 2 undefeated shows here so far in 2021. I mean, are the Raiders for real? I mean, again, I kind of mentioned earlier on, right? Week 5 to me is kind of where we really start seeing the real meat of the NFL season start. Are the Raiders for real, or is that lack of balance on offense, that lack of performance on the offensive line overall, at least from a grading standpoint, right? For as much as that carries weight, is this bubble going to get burst at some point in time, or can the Raiders compete in the AFC West for the entire season?
I feel like they can compete, and this is why, because all the teams that they played so far, and I get a small sample size, as we mentioned, they're all AFC teams. You play Baltimore, play Pittsburgh, play Miami. Those are all AFC teams. Those are all AFC wins. Those are going to matter at the end of the season. When you start talking about wild card seeding and hey, who knows? Kansas City, they may, all of a sudden start to fall. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to bury them already, even though where they're starting at right now, sitting at the bottom of the AFC West. It's kind of cool to see. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, what is it like to be down there, Kansas? They ain't been there in so long. It's like, what is it like for them? So, I think that they're going to rebound and be really good again. They have a few hiccups to overcome, but I just think that these games that the Raiders are winning right now, and got one on Monday, another AFC game, and even though it's AFC West, it's AFC as well. So that's 4 straight AFC games to start the season. I think they could play real big dividends if they win this game. But yeah, it's so funny. I asked that question on the radio the other day. Yeah, at what point do you believe that this team has a chance to be special? And I heard everything from right now till, I'm not saying that until they get into the playoffs. I'm not saying that till the first time they play the Chiefs. There's been so many different answers. So the fan base is kind of like, and I'm sure Cody has the same feelings, they're kind of just on edge, waiting maybe for that balloon to bust, but hoping it doesn't bust, And so I think you just got to ride the wave. I do think the team is legit. I think especially having a defense that they haven't had in years. Now, they don't have the Broncos defense, but they have a defense. They have something that can stop the ball. I think that's a big deal. So, right now I'll say that this team is a legit team and probably only going to get better, especially if they can get that run game going.
No, it's like I said, I've been blown away by watching the Raiders play so far this season. And look, Broncos fans didn't like it when I said, like, hey, you have to take a look because we were looking at the AFC West. It's so weird. If you would have said, Q, let's say in the offseason before we did our Ultimate Division crossover, that we said that Kansas City would be at the bottom through 3 weeks, the Broncos and the Raiders would be tied for first in the AFC West. I think you and I would have been like, really? That's a little interesting there. I mean, I think the more distance you can create if you're the Raiders within the division, obviously AFC games, those conference wins, divisional games. Look, this is going to be their first divisional matchup of the year. And then 2 weeks from now, they have the other divisional matchup against the Denver Broncos. And like you said, I think there is that kind of tension here for 2-3-0 teams as to, is this team for real or is it a product of an early sample size? And that's something that I know that applies to the Denver Broncos. But the Las Vegas Raiders, they look really good, a high explosive offense. And look, we're going to get a Monday Night Football thriller. And the only shame is that we're not going to have Peyton Manning and Eli Manning on the Manning cast this week. They're off for a few weeks. I'm bummed out about that. But obviously, ladies and gentlemen, you can check out your boy Q. He's our boy Q. He's on a lot of things. The Locked On NFL podcast on Fridays with Chris Carter, host of Locked On Steelers, not to mention Locked On Raiders every single day, and a Locked On Bets podcast with Lee Sterling. So make sure you tune into those podcasts as your first listen, second listen, even third listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Q, my man, great to see you as always, and I can't wait to talk with you here in a couple of weeks for Crossover Thursday, Broncos and Raiders.
Absolutely, man. You guys keep doing your thing, man. You're doing a great job.
Boom. Appreciate you, Q. And obviously, that is your boy Q. And I tell you what, David, I like the point that you made about the AFC West. Q and I, every single year, we have these crossover meetings. We look at like the rosters of these teams and we say, okay, you know what? This might be a very competitive division. And I think the biggest question for the Denver Broncos has been, well, what's the quarterback situation look like for them? And so far, Teddy Bridgewater has been very efficient. And a lot of people said, well, they played the Giants, they played the Jets, they played the Jaguars. The reality is they've also sent a lot of pressure at him, and he's held on to the ball, and he's went to his first, second, third, or fourth read, and he's delivered. So I've been very impressed with Teddy Bridgewater, but a really big test here today for the Denver Broncos hosting the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson. The talk all week long has been, Lamar missed 2 consecutive days of practice with a back injury, and I said it myself. I was like, you ever think that this was in question, you're silly. Lamar Jackson was always going to play. He was never in danger. They're going to rest him up a little bit and get him ready. But a big test for the Broncos, who defensively, they look the part. But there's some things that Ravens defense does in terms of blitz looks, different disguises, and coverage that maybe Teddy Bridgewater can't get away with some of the things he's gotten away with so far. So it's a really big test here for Denver this week. Your thoughts on the Broncos and Teddy Bridgewater so far? Because I know you've been following Teddy a little bit.
Yeah, I love Teddy Bridgewater. And again, going back to when the Buccaneers brought in Tom Brady, he was another guy on that list, and all the rumors, unconfirmed by me personally, but all the rumors out there in the world were that if they didn't get Tom, they were going to go after Teddy, and I was perfectly happy with that. A lot of Bucs fans thought that was a drastic, downgrade and everything else, and who knows how it would have worked out. But I was hugely in favor of that move. And then when Carolina got him, I thought it was a good move. And then when they kind of gave up on him, he kind of reminds me a little bit, Cody, of Kyle Orton. Right, a guy who plays well from time to time and shows good leadership, and that he's a team player, especially during his time there in Denver, but never really gets fully bought into by a coaching staff and never really has a team build around his skill set. And I kind of feel like that's a disservice to guys like that. And so I'm incredibly happy to see the success that they're having so far. And I mean, we need to see 2 5-0 teams coming in, 2 weeks from now when Raiders and Broncos play, because I think that as much as we love covering the teams that we love, the Broncos can be at the bottom of the league and the NFL is okay. The Buccaneers can be at the bottom of the league and the NFL is okay. But when the Raiders are on top or the Cowboys are on top, as much as we hate it, the NFL is just a little bit better when those types of teams are playing really well. And look, if the Broncos can beat the Ravens this week, the Steelers next week, come in undefeated against the Raiders, and then the Raiders beats, win their matchup this weekend and then beat the Bears next weekend, that's going to be one heck of a game to watch. And really two teams that will have proven, I think, by then that they are for real and that they need to be dealt with. And then somebody's going to take over. And, when the Kansas City Chiefs are 1-4 in the same week or something, something like that, it's going to be a real page turner and everything else for everybody else. So really excited to see what they can continue to do, really hoping that none of this is pretend, so to speak, because the AFC West is definitely one of my favorite divisions to watch right now.
Well, let's shift gears here from the AFC West to the NFC East. Obviously, another team that you cover there in the Washington football team. For them, they're coming off of a tough loss last week to the Buffalo Bills, who seemingly looked like the offensive unit that we saw the week prior. Now they're on the road here. They're taking on the Atlanta Falcons, who are coming off their first win of the season against the New York Giants. In your opinion, what do you feel like the biggest issue has been here for the Washington football team so far to start? Because the hype coming into the season is they might have one of the NFL's top defenses. And, look, they have Terry McLaurin, who's been fantastic. He's been special. They're going to get a boost today because Curtis Samuel is expected to be back. What are your thoughts here so far on the Washington football team in this matchup against the Atlanta Falcons?
I think it's a game they have to win. Like you hate to say must-win games in week 4 and everything, but I mean this team has a murderer's row of opponents ahead of them, especially this defense. I mean this defense has been getting torched by the likes of Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Daniel Jones, worked them over. They still have Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, and Tom Brady to look forward to. So I mean if they can't get right against Matt Ryan, who looking less like Matty Ice, looking more like no, I don't want to get too insulting, but I mean, he's a quarterback. I feel bad for him too, actually, to be honest with you, because he's a quarterback in the midst of a team that's rebuilding, and he doesn't have time to rebuild in his career. He needs to win now, and he needs to get back to a championship opportunity. But that's for a later date with Aaron Freeman. The defense has easily been the most disappointing part of this Washington football team so far in this season. The offense, you kind of always had a little bit of a nervous anticipation. Like, yeah, they have some weapons. Antonio Gibson, you mentioned Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, De'Ami Brown out of North Carolina as a number 3 wide receiver was very intriguing. And then Ryan Fitzpatrick, Fitzmagic to tie it all together. But he goes down in the second possession of the season for the Washington football team offense. Curtis Samuel hadn't played or practiced really since May. De'Ami Brown is no longer number 3. He's a number 2. And I mean, it's just, every plan or every anticipation or hope that the Washington football team had for their offense just completely went to crap when Ryan Fitzpatrick hurt his hip. And then Taylor Heineke came in, and look, he's got 2 NFL starts under his belt when he enters last week against the Buffalo Bills, and he looked like a quarterback to kind of steal from Lauren. He looked like a quarterback that didn't have that kind of experience. He's 28, 29 years old, but really he's a rookie quarterback in the National Football League. This Atlanta Falcons defense hasn't had an interception all season. They really haven't had a whole lot of interception opportunities that they just haven't capitalized on. They just haven't been in the right place. The Washington defense, same thing. They've been a defense that looks out of sorts. So really, I mean, it's kind of a story of 2 teams that neither of them have been on the same page, coaching staff to player to coaching staff, and even players together communicating in the back end of the secondary, especially. So it's going to be a matter of, can either of these teams come out and look like the team they hope to be in 2021, or are we just going to have a really messy game? And I don't know, the team that turns the ball over the least is going to be the one that wins it. I mean, it's hard to expect anything, but you really hope that Washington, at least their defense, can get some new things going, because communication has been a huge focal point for that unit, from Jack Del Rio to Chase Young to everybody else involved.
Absolutely. Well, communication is key, and we get the best communication from a fantasy football perspective here from Vinny Iyer, host of the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Vinny, good morning. Week 4 of the NFL season is here, and I tell you what, I'm sitting at 3-0 right now on my dynasty leagues, and a lot of it has been thanks to your advice. So, obviously, a salute to you, Vinny. How you doing today?
Well, doing well, Cody. Thanks for having me. Good to see you as well, David. So let's do this.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't want to talk Dynasty Leagues too much, because I'm getting worked pretty good in our Locked On Dynasty League. But I do have Bryan Edwards, kind of sticking with the theme of today, Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver. He's done some decent things, done some good things. I think he's a pretty good Dynasty stash. Maybe you can correct me on that. But my question really today, and for our viewers, is he worth a 2021 roster spot in season leagues, in season-long leagues? Because, again, I got Dynasty. If it takes him a couple years to really become the guy, I can wait a little bit while I continue to lose to Locked On hosts week after week. But if I'm playing in a season league, is Bryan Edwards worth the investment?
Well, it's hard because the Raiders kind of are Darren Waller first, everybody else next. Henry Ruggs has made some big plays. Hunter Renfrow seems like the guy that Derek Carr is going to trust in most situations, working out of the slot when he's not looking to Waller. So I think it's going to be a bit sporadic with that Raiders passing game. I still think they want to be a running team, with quotes for John Gruden there. And now we'll see what happens with Josh Jacobs back. Maybe they'll be tempted with Jacobs and Peyton Barber and Kenyon Drake to really focus on that part of their offense. So I think it's going to be matchup dependent week to week, what you get from all these receivers. And I think ideally you'd like Ruggs and Edwards to be pretty consistent here and making plays. But right now, we know it starts with Darren Waller. I'd say Renfro's the next guy that you can trust in deeper leagues because he's always going to look that way, Derek Carr. So I don't know. This year, kind of lukewarm on also using Ruggs in a weekly situation. So I want to see how it plays out, but I wouldn't be surprised if Edwards was the favorite target over Ruggs there going into 2022.
Obviously, a lot of intriguing Week 4 matchups here today, Vinny. What are some key matchups that you're eyeing that people maybe should look at starting so far this week in their lineups in the early games and afternoon?
Well, I heard you guys talking a little bit about the Washington-Atlanta game. I think this could be a sneaky, high-scoring affair. I look at Washington's defense really struggling. They have a lot of talent there, but the effort has been really bad. I mean, we've seen it week in and week out. I don't know what's wrong there. There's some fundamental issues for Jack Del Rio. So when you look at that game, sneaky points there. Taylor Heineke and Matt Ryan. I think Calvin Ridley, people have been waiting for, where's the Calvin Ridley of fantasy football? I think it might happen in this game. It finally breaks out. Terry McLaurin should get back on track here as well. I like the tight ends as well, Logan Thomas and Kyle Pitts, to do some damage in this one. So that's one of those games that's out there on the sneaky radar. Another game that I think could have a lot of points and could help you is the 49ers Seahawks game. I think you look at the Seahawks, just terrible defense. They're not stopping the run. Maybe a chance for Trey Sermon to get going there finally in a legitimate run-heavy game plan for the 49ers. On the other side, DK Metcalf, I think, could really go off in this one. The 49ers secondary, it seems like someone new gets hurt every week. Last week it was K'Wan Williams and Josh Norman. So they're just really depleted back there, and Russell Wilson's going to go after him big time.
Yeah, and talk about injury impacts. I mean, we talked to Patricia trainer about the Giants, Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton out for this game against the New Orleans Saints. Kenny Golladay hasn't quite looked right with the Giants yet. Saquon Barkley's still getting up to speed. Evan Ingram, I don't know if he's ever going to be successful with the New York Giants, but someone's got to get those targets, right, Vinny? So if there's a sleeper pick in there, maybe for a daily format that you might be able to buy low on and get some good production out of a PPR format or something, who's the target in New York to pick up for this weekend specifically with those guys out?
Well, maybe it's a chance for Kadarius Toney to get going. I mean, this is the golden chance. I mean, you have your two key receivers that you have the most experience with Daniel Jones out. I know it's been hard getting on the same page with these new receivers, Golladay and Toney, but here's their opportunity. They drafted Toney the first round. He has a lot of special skills, can stretch the field, a big-time playmaker that you can use in the slot. So let's get the ball to him, see what happens, move him around. And this is just a situation where you want to see them expand, actually live up to adding all these weapons and wanting to open up the offense with Jason Garrett, because we know it's probably getting on thin ice with Jason Garrett calling the plays there with New York. So they got to get something out of this game here. So Toney, you would look there. Don't forget also about the two hamstrung receivers of the Tennessee Titans this game against the Jets. I mean, someone's got to catch passes there. It could be Josh Reynolds. It could be Nick Westbrook-Ikini. So a lot of injuries dealing with. It seems like a lot of hamstrings. So maybe a little bit of conditioning issues for some wide receivers out of the gate here.
Speaking of some wide receivers, you mentioned San Francisco, Seattle was an earlier matchup. I have both Tyler Lockett, who's expected to play, and Deebo Samuel. Is it advisable to play both of these guys here today? Should I look at somebody on my bench?
I think you have to play both those guys. I mean, these defenses are really struggling. The Seahawks, I don't know what they can stop other than Jamal Adams making some plays. I haven't seen anything there that gives me confidence that they're going to stop anything, run or pass. And the 49ers, I mean, they'd like to stop the passing game, but Nick Bosa can't do it by himself. There's nobody on the back end, and he's not getting a lot of help up front with the Javon Kinlaw hurt. Eric Armstead is feeling a little bit better, but it's basically Nick Bosa trying to make plays and Jamal Adams trying to make plays. That's not enough. There's 10 other guys that are struggling out there. You got two offenses that are creative and exciting. So I expect that to be a high-scoring game, not disappointing fantasy. And if you're playing daily, you want to have a lot of shares of that game for sure, as well as Washington, Atlanta.
Boom.
Yeah,
Love
definitely.
it. Love it. Do you have anything else you'd like to add here, David?
Final question for me, going back to the other game that we profiled on this weekend's episode here, the Bears and the Lions. Vinny, what do you make of that Chicago Bears offense and what they did against the Cleveland Browns defense? Is this the week to stream the Lions defense, or do you think the Bears bounce back a little bit better and keep the Lions on the bench?
Well, keep in mind, Lions defense is kind of depleted as well. I mean, their best players are basically gone. I mean, Jeffrey Okuda's out for the season. You have Jamie Collins is gone. Trey Flowers is hurt. They have nobody really healthy. Michael Brockers also, and Romeo Okwara hurting on that defense. So there's a lot of opportunities there for the Bears to get well. We're looking for get well games for the Bears. That includes Allen Robinson, David Montgomery, whoever they decide starting quarterback. I think we might have a decision there, but I'm more interested in the skill players than the quarterbacks here. So Robinson and Montgomery, we want to get these guys going. These guys were reliable no matter what garbage was going up with the offensive line or quarterback last year. They produced. That's what we want to see again. Robinson has a great matchup this week against his secondary. Let's get David Montgomery the ball. I mean, he's the bread and butter of what you did to get in the playoffs last year. So I think it's a get well game. Do this, keep it simple, stupid type of game. Let's get it going here with the Bears because the Lions defense is that bad all around.
Well, obviously, Vinny, thank you so much for your fantasy insight. And ladies and gentlemen, Vinny has you covered every single day with the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. You need all the latest information. Vinny has you covered, not to mention on Twitter. He has you updated with all the live stuff that you need throughout the day prior to kickoff so you can make these adjustments in your starting lineup. Vinny, thank you so much. Looking forward to having you back on next week.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a good one. Good luck in your fantasy leagues this week.
Thanks, Vinny.
It's been a good start for me so far. You know, David, you know, I made the mistake last week though. Before everything, I had AJ Brown in my starting lineup. And then he went down in the first quarter with a hamstring, and I left Emmanuel Sanders on the bench who had a really, really big day. So I found a way to get Emmanuel Sanders into my lineup today against the Houston Texans. But yes, the fantasy football, obviously, this is my first year really going full in instead just committing to one league rather than 6 leagues like I used to. And I tell you what, my life, my mental health is so much better. So, and a lot of that is thanks to Vinny's fantasy football advice. But, you know, David, as we get into the final moments of today's episode of the show, let's go through a couple of games here so far today to pick. We talked Washington football team, the Falcons. You said it's a kind of a must win here for the Washington football team. Who do you have in this one?
I do have Washington. I think that Taylor Heineke, against the New York Giants, he showed better decision making against the Buffalo Bills, a little bit lesser so. I think that, if Curtis Samuel can get on the field, even if he's really mainly a decoy, it's still going to force the Falcons defense to spread out more. And I think that's really what this Washington offense was built to do, was spread the defense out, create a lot of space, especially for guys like Logan Thomas. I look for Logan to have a really big day. I think Antonio Gibson probably has a really big day against his defense as well. And as long as Taylor Heineke goes out there and protects the football, then they should be able to pull out that victory.
The Houston Texans are on the road to take on the Buffalo Bills, who had a very, very big offensive output last week. Who do you have in this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's the Bills we expected. I think that's the real Buffalo Bills teams and playing in Buffalo. I mean, I don't know if nobody's ever been in that stadium there in upstate New York. I don't know if it's because the air is thinner, so it makes everybody louder. But I mean, I've never been to a game in that stadium. It was New Era Field at the time. And I didn't leave with a headache. And I know that sounds miserable. Why would you keep going? But that's just kind of how loud and excited those fans are. And it doesn't matter who they're beating and by how much. Every single good play is going to be celebrated. The Houston Texans, I mean, I don't see how they overcome that environment, let alone the Bills that finally look like they're getting on track.
The undefeated Carolina Panthers off to a hot start. They're taking on the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. This might be the tough one to pick this week. Who you going with?
Listen, I did a podcast. It was actually a Dallas Cowboys podcast, but there was a Sam Darnold fan on there, and I kind of threw a little bit of Sam Darnold shade, and he kind of told me that I was sleeping on Sam, and it was more Adam Gase. Look, I mean, he might be right. I mean, I don't know. This is a tough one. If it was in Carolina, I think I might lean more towards Carolina, but because it's in Dallas and Dak has looked amazing since coming back from that injury and then the shoulder injury they dealt with during training camp. He's looked a lot better than I expected, to be quite honest with you. So I got to lean Cowboys on that one, but it's a lot closer. I mean, if you had asked me during the preseason week 4 to predict this game, there would have been no hesitation, but now it's a little bit closer than I expected. So, I mean, kudos to Sam, Matt Rule, all those guys there in Carolina, they're putting something together.
This could be a trap game here today for the Tennessee Titans taking on the New York Jets. And obviously no Julio Jones, no A.J. Brown. You're going to have Chester Rogers, some other guys having to step up for a Tennessee Titans offense that, yes, they have Derrick Henry, but the Jets defense is actually very underrated so far this season. They've done their part. It's the offense for the Jets that has really struggled going. They will be activating Denzel Mims for the first time. In your opinion, could this be the upset special of the day?
It absolutely could be. I think I still lean Titans on it. I've got a very massive parlay actually inspired by you for mentioning it. Actually, I've got a 16-team parlay that'll pay me very nicely for very little risk if I hit on it. And I did go Titans, but I can't lie and say that I didn't pause here. But I kind of lean back to, I can't remember who it was, but it was years and years ago who kind of said, and again, I don't want to be too disrespectful to anybody out here, doing their work, but he kind of said back then about the Jaguars that the Jaguars suck until they don't suck. It's kind of how I look at the New York Jets. You know what I mean? They're going to kind of have to pull off some of those upsets before I start to believe they could truly be that upset team. But if you have a little bit more of a wild streak in you and you're putting money on games, this could be the one that you make a nice profit off of.
Our final two games we'll talk about here today, it's an NFC West special. The Arizona Cardinals sitting at a 3-1 record, taking on the Rams, 3-0 record, taking on the Rams, who are also 3-0 at this time. And this is going to be a fun matchup. Kyler Murray and that Cardinals offense, which has been electric. They're taking on an offense under Matthew Stafford that last week against Tampa Bay. Deshaun Jackson, we saw the reemergence of him, but not to mention that Rams defense is also tough. How do you see this game going here?
I think it's Rams. I mean, there's a lot of defenses in the NFL that haven't lived up to their billing, from before the season started to now, and we talked about a few of those. The Rams defense has. They've stepped up, and Matt Stafford is just looking more and more comfortable in this offense. And really, from probably midway through the second quarter on against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen Matt Stafford having more fun playing football and doing it against a Super Bowl caliber defense at the same time. So I think the Cardinals, this is like the wrong time to go into Los Angeles and face this team because as confident and as excited they are, I think they have the leaders. Matt Stafford knows what it's like to lose, so I don't think he's going to let himself get too high. Aaron Donald, that coaching staff has done a really good job of keeping the mind space correct. I mean, Deshaun Jackson came into that game last week frustrated with his lack of contribution on the team. And a lot of times we've seen when Deshaun gets frustrated, it doesn't usually lead to an increase in performance, right? It usually leads to a decrease. But he absolutely exploded all over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, I mean, I think there's just too much for the Cardinals to handle here, and I think the Rams win this one.
I like it. Now, the other NFC West matchup that we're talking about here, the Seattle Seahawks traveling to San Francisco to take on the 49ers. Vinny, you talked about it. This is going to be a game where he expects it to be very high scoring, probably take the over in this matchup. Who do you have coming out on top?
I think I have Seattle. This is a tough one as well. And usually I lean defense in these kind of like on the fence picks. And I think the 49ers obviously have the better defense here, but just Russell Wilson, man. I mean, there's just something about him. And when you have a quarterback like that on the field, you're never out of it. And like you said, Tyler Lockett expected to play. Also have him in my money league in fantasy football. So really need a good day out of him. I think what the 49ers do best on defense, Russell Wilson matches up against really well. So I think he's the X factor in this. I think he can help them get over the hump against this team in this game.
Absolutely. We're just about 58 minutes away from kickoff of week 4 around the National Football League. And if you're a football fan of any team, we have a locked on insert team name podcast for you, whether it's the NFL, NHL, MLB, NBA, college sports. We have you covered. Your team every day, the local experts on the biggest stories. And we have some really exciting things, some positive, really cool changes happening here with the Locked On Sunday NFL pregame show coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. But obviously, a major shout out to our good friend David Harrison. Thank you so much for joining me here today to talk football. And obviously, Ross Jackson will be back next week. He's enjoying the New Orleans press box right now for the matchup against the New York Giants. So, David, my man, great insight as always. I know you and I have a lot of similar picks and similar outrage in our Facebook comment section from a lot of people, my friend. But loved having you on here today.
I appreciate you, Cody. Appreciate you guys allowing me the opportunity to pinch hit every once in a while. And yeah, super happy for Ross to be there in the Superdome. Looking forward to getting back in the press box this season myself. I think Washington Bucks, actually, interestingly enough, the game where I'm covering both sides of the matchup is probably going to be my first game in the press box this season. So really looking forward to that. It's a great experience, and being on this show with you guys is always great as well.
I mean, what an experience that's going to be for you. You have to do one, not only that, you do two podcasts, obviously, when they play just in general, but now they play each other. You're going to do a podcast on the Washington football team and on the Bucks that game. So I wonder how you're going to feel. Either way, I think you win. You're going to come out happy. So I think that's all that matters. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for today's Locked On NFL Sunday Week 4 pregame show. All football talk, no fluff. Make sure that you follow or subscribe to your favorite Locked On podcast, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts, and check out the wide variety of shows on YouTube as we continue to grow out that platform. I'm Cody Roark, speaking for my good friend David Harrison. We'll see you next week for a brand new Locked On NFL Sunday.